Hey everybody, welcome into a Nichols Worth on take two. I'm your host Keaton Nichols. Welcome into the program. Appreciate everyone for joining me on the show tonight. Each and every night at 8 p.m. This is what we do. We get together, we talk politics, we talk news, we talk pop culture, we talk sports, we talk a little bit of everything. Appreciate the folks listening out there on Twitch tonight. Make sure you're following me on Twitch, on Instagram as well. Those are just alternate ways that you can watch the show. If you're watching right now on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch, and you can see at the bottom of the screen how you can follow me at Keaton D. Nichols. I see Chris Murray already checking in on the Instagram, saying, what up, Keaton? Make sure you check out Chris Murray, who also has a great sports program each and every Saturday at WURD Radio, as well at, I believe, 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. Make sure you correct me on that, Chris, as well. We support journalism here in this house, and we also support good journalists rather, as well. So, welcome into the program. If you've been here before, you kind of know how this works. We talk about the news, politics, pop culture, and sports of the day, and you are free to comment in on what you think about what's happening. So, make sure you continue to keep on that tradition today. We'll talk about a lot of different things today. Try and get as much as we can in within a responsible amount of time. So feel free to jump in the conversation when you would like. And give us a share on your timelines if you would be so kind. That really helps the show out as well. You can also help the show out by subscribing. Right there at the bottom of the screen for my Instagram folks, it says new episodes are available at anchor.fm/a Nichols Worth, including a great interview with a good friend of mine, Jasmine Williams, who has a delectable blog, folks, called Dough Girl. So the information for that is up on the page right now. Go check out the blog, or go check out the podcast so you can find out more about the blog. Anyway, today's headlines today, as we get into it, they are sponsored, of course, by Parkour. ParkourTherapy.com is where you can get 10% off all apparel on the website. Apparel like I'm wearing right now, for the folks that can see it. One of my favorites out of the Parkour collection. You can do that right now at parkourtherapy.com and use the promo code ANW2021. Check out Chris Murray's show, by the way, on Saturdays at WURD Radio at 11 a.m. All right, let's get into it. Headlines for the day today. I saw this one. This one was interesting for me. Sha'Carri Richardson receives an endorsement from a weed vaping company. This coming out of Blavity, although the original story was taken from TMZ. Now, this might seem like an interesting sort of thing here. A weed vaping company endorsement. I mean, but let's get into it. It's called Dr. Dabber. This is the name of the company. They specialize in marijuana. It's offering Sha'Carri this endorsement for some $250,000, according to this letter obtained by TMZ. Who knows how real it is, but I do trust the good folks over at TMZ. They do good work. I'm telling you, folks, don't let the name fool you. TMZ is a totally legitimate news website. Anyway, they say Dr. Dabber does that. It's within their best interest. They recognize her awesome talents, talking about Sha'Carri Richardson's awesome talents, and thought it was quite unfortunate what happened to her with the Olympics. Of course, as you know, Richardson was suspended for 30 days from the Olympics after a positive marijuana test, following a testing trial where I guess you could say she smoked the competition, no pun intended, in the trials very fast. And anyway, that resulted in the women's relay team, I believe, deciding not to include her on the team, so to speak. So she's completely out of the Olympics for this year. At first, I was like, this is kind of silly, for this kind of thing to go through. But you know what? Looking at the direction of how quickly marijuana is kind of going from this taboo sort of corner of America to being something that is not only quite popular, but soon to be quite profitable, especially for some government folks here and there. This would actually not be that bad of an idea for Sha'Carri to get involved in, being, maybe if it's not specifically this company, something similar to this. Just saying. Right? A couple of weeks ago, or this is not even a couple of weeks ago. This is probably, I don't know, might have been the same week that we were talking about Sha'Carri and her failed marijuana test. We were talking about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who you wouldn't expect to say this kind of thing, commenting on a case that the courts decided not to take. He said, look, this whole federal marijuana law thing probably needs to go. In so many words. If he was cool, that's probably what he would say. But he said something along those lines, right? Like, these federal marijuana laws need to go. They don't really make sense based upon the idea that, of course, a 50-state strategy is being taken, or is the approach, rather, when it comes to how to legislate weed. Each state has their own rules. So if each state has their own rules legalizing it, it doesn't make sense to have a federal rule that shadows, technically, those state rules that goes against that. It just doesn't make sense. But anyway, you can see the momentum, the waters changing, if you will, on this issue. Which brings us, of course, to our second headline, that Democrats, and boo, not to the Democrats, but boo what they're doing here. U.S. Senate Democrats are rolling out a draft bill to legalize weed. I hate the too little, too late narrative type of thing. And I've talked about this on my show, the frustration, behind weed kind of now being the cool thing in society. It feels really fake, and it feels really, disingenuous to me. But anyway, this coming out of Reuters, 3 top U.S. Democratic senators today unveiled a discussion draft of a bill that aims to legalize cannabis, a move that would allow adult Americans to buy and possess up to 10 ounces of marijuana without facing criminal penalties. For those of you that don't know, or maybe have an unfamiliarity with how much 10 ounces of marijuana is, it's somewhere between a lot and a whole lot. That's a lot of weed. 10 ounces. Anyway, this is just a discussion draft. I'm sure it's going to change a lot over the next couple of months, and probably, I don't know, I don't want to say years, but however long it's going to take for this draft bill idea to materialize into something that somebody could call a bill. And then passing it is a whole different thing. But anyway, early on, it's called the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act. It's been floated right now by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Finance Chairman Ron Wyden, and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. That last one is important. And anyway, this CAOA, I don't know if they have an acronym for it right now, this Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act, would expunge federal nonviolent marijuana crimes. It's one of the things that it would do, and I think that that's a big deal. It's one of the things that I've been sort of why this whole, shift on marijuana has felt kind of weird to me, because there's still people serving time or serving some sort of penalty in some way for marijuana crimes, federal marijuana convictions, rather. So if we're going to shift all the laws and it's cool now and, everybody can do whatever now, then you got to let those folks out. And you got to stop punishing those that were previously under that. That's the idea here for this bill, at least early on. It says it's also going to further medical research, allow cannabis companies to access essential financial services, which is a pretty big deal. If you're a company that is doing a lot of business with marijuana involved, you can't do any business with the federal government, which includes banking, which includes, certain tax regulations, tax situations and things like that. You don't want to get involved with that, right? Because now it's a big log jam between what's allowed in the state, what you're allowed to do and flourish as in the state, but not what you're really allowed to do on a federal level. That gets really dicey. So this bill would essentially, or this idea that they have, this draft, would essentially alleviate those issues. We'll have to see how it plays out in Congress, though. I don't really think that there's any reasonable reason to suspect that Republicans would be on board. They've had resistance to this, public resistance to this, but it's included statements kind of like, well, we need to do more research. I think that's I can't even think of the senator who said that, the Republican senator that said that today. But I thought that was funny, right? The Republican response to marijuana legalization is oftentimes, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay? There's not like really a lot of reason behind it. There's not really a lot of detail. It's just kind of like, whoa. Okay? We don't know what we're getting into. We can't just legalize this stuff, And it pretty much stops there. Not that they have to have a reason beyond that. It could just say no, as they've proven they've done time and time again with different pieces of legislation. They could just say no. But you got to think that the reasons and the constituents maybe might be clamoring for this kind of thing too, to be able to buy marijuana in an open market here in the country. Like Republicans, it's one of those issues. Republican, Democrat doesn't really matter, right? So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in Congress. The Democrats, of course, as I mentioned time and again, they always want to be on the right side of history. They're the ones that are introducing this bill. I'm sure it'll go back and forth and change a lot before it actually becomes a bill. Again, we'll see. We'll see. I'm also interested, before we move on, I'm interested to see what this is going to do to the weed market, though. Like, there's still a lot of people who sell weed. I don't know these people personally. I'm just saying. Still a lot of people out there, that are dealing with the underground, if you will, quote unquote, weed market. And as I read earlier in this story, Americans would be allowed to possess with this draft bill up to 10 ounces of weed, of marijuana, or its equivalent in other forms or whatever. But 10 ounces, that's a lot, right? If I can legally buy up to 10 ounces from, the store or, some shop down the road, I almost have no reason to engage or dip in the underground market anymore, unless, of course, things are maybe cheaper there. But how could that be, right? I'm just interested to see. I think it's going to do very interesting things to that market, which could have a wider reaching effect than people realize, right? Not that necessarily marijuana becomes this, multi-million dollar market that so many different groups of people can take advantage of. But I think for a lot of people too, they're in a position where they might sell weed for a little extra money here or there, or they might dabble somewhere within that market. And if they say to themselves, well, I can't move this weed anymore, what's the reaction after that? Like what happens after that? Like, do they say, well, I guess I'm just giving up selling, weed and other drugs, quote unquote drugs, on the underground market? Or are they going to move to something else? They're going to shift and adjust their game. There are a lot of things to consider with this market. Right now, we just kind of consider, well, if you sell weed, you're doing something illegal. There's a whole world there. And I'm just interested to see what this kind of legislation and the legalization of marijuana across the United States, as more states are kind of jumping on the recreational bandwagon, if you will. What happens with them? Let me know what you think in the comment section. If you're listening out there and you have a 2 cents on this, like my boy Jay, he comments in on the Instagram. He says, even the dispensary from legal states are selling stuff illegally, so they don't have to pay the tax on selling marijuana. That is a point, and it is a very true point right now. Dispensaries right now, and also other shops and stores and things like that have been allowed to flourish in this era of weed decriminalization. Not for us here in Pennsylvania, that's what it is, but for a lot of other states, it's weed legalization. But in this market, if you will, a lot of these stores have popped up, and a lot of them do kind of ride the line as to what they're allowed to sell and what they're not allowed to sell, things like that, right? But to get around the tax situation, I don't know. I'd probably have to sit down with a shop owner or not a shop owner, a dispensary owner, or somebody that sells products along those lines to really talk about what exactly it's like to deal with that kind of thing. But I'd be interested to know. I'd be really interested to know, kind of what they do. But I certainly don't doubt what you're saying, that they're selling stuff illegally just to, kind of avoid being taxed on the marijuana thing, because they can't really be taxed. Places where do you put your money? If you can't really use banks as well. Another interesting question. My boy Chris Murray, he's on the line. He says, I could use a part-time job selling weed, as I don't get it from Big Worm from Fridays. Yes, of course. Don't get it from Big Worm. But yeah, that's, it's not going to be talked about. I haven't heard it talked about in a lot of markets. When we talk about weed, like, what happens to this underground market? That underground market is critical to a lot of people. And I know people are going to push back like, yo, people shouldn't be selling drugs, all that other stuff. Sure, I'm with you on that. But the reality of it is there are people doing this, and there are people basing a significant portion of their incoming funds on a monthly basis on how much weed they sell. If this becomes legalized across the board, if there are no federal, penalties, if you will, for buying, possessing, and in some cases moving weed from place to place, what that's going to do is it's going to allow bigger companies and bigger entities. They're the ones that are going to be able to take advantage of this, not the dealers, not the street dealers, not the people who sell a little bit of weed here and there to make ends meet. So that market, something interesting going to happen to it. Let me know what you think in the comments. Also about Sha'Carri Richardson receiving a $250,000 offer to endorse a weed vaping company called Dr. Dabber. Crazy stuff. But, I mean, honestly, by the next time Sha'Carri Richardson is going to be running in the Olympics, weed is going to be legalized in all 50 states and then some. Like, the laws are going to be, that might happen in the next 4 to 8 months. So, of course, 4 years from now, in another Olympic run, of course. She'd take video. I mean, I think it'd be good for her pocketbook at the very least. Let me know what you think. Chris says they should have individual distributors if they get it legally. Now you're talking about individual distributors for the people who buy it or for the people who are selling it. Let me know what you think there, Chris, and we can straighten that out. All right, let me get to my next headline here. I saw this trending on Twitter, this hashtag trending on Twitter a little bit earlier. You gotta love trending hashtags on Twitter. Maybe we can have a segment on the show called hashtags trending on Twitter, real original type of stuff. Anyway, for now it's headlines, and this one says DeSantis selling, quote, "Don't Fauci my Florida," end quote, koozies. I should have probably prepared this with an image that I could flash on the screen, but let me try and describe it to you the best way that I can describe it to you. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is selling merchandise on his campaign website, taking shots at Anthony Fauci, the nation's leading infectious disease expert. The merchandise includes drink koozies, which are like the outside things where, keeps your hand from interacting with, the temperature of the drink, super cold, super hot, whatever it is. And there's always like an endorsement on it. But anyway, the merchandise includes drink koozies and shirts that say "Don't Fauci my Florida" and flags that closely resemble former President Trump's style, saying "Keep Florida free." This a bit interesting whenever I checked it out, because it led to a few other things that I saw going on around the internets today related to anti-vaxxing and related to this issue kind of gaining steam around the country. Yesterday we talked about vaccine passports in relation to France, what that country is doing, introducing sort of vaccine passports for those wanting to see movies, going on trains, and things like that, because not a high enough percentage of their population is vaccinated right now, and that's a huge problem for France, obviously, and any other country that does not have a significant enough portion of their population vaccinated, because the Delta variant is going crazy right now. And the Delta variant, and the people rather that are dying from COVID-19 are almost exclusively non-vaccinated people. United States missed their goal. France, in order to increase their numbers, are basically putting these vaccine passports into place. They're saying, look, we're not saying that you have to get a vaccine, but if you would like to go on this train, if you would like to see this movie, and if you are a healthcare worker, then you must get the vaccine. If you are a healthcare worker on a train on your way to go see a movie, then you definitely need the vaccine. For sure, times 3. Everywhere else, it's just strongly encouraged that you get one, although the rules might be changing on that in France. So we're looking at that as kind of looking ahead, right? Is that what's headed for us? I said on the show yesterday, it almost seems inevitable that in order for the United States to get anywhere near a point where it says that it has eradicated or eliminated the coronavirus, I think that you would have to literally force people. And I'm not saying that that's what you do have to do for the general population, but the sort of hotly contested political environment, I guess you could say, over this issue of coronavirus, which I mentioned last year when I started this podcast, this segment of the podcast, at least. I mentioned that this was going to be dangerous. This whole idea of politicizing the virus itself is going to be dangerous, because politicizing is about picking sides. Only one of those sides can be right. In short, it's about other things too, but that's what happens when you politicize something. And it's easy to take sides, no matter what the facts are in the middle. Politicizing causes people to just go to one side or the other, and not much thought is put into that decision all the time. We cannot, and we should not rather have done that with a deadly virus that's going around. Why? Because there's not, information that's relevant to just Democrats and just Republicans, just liberals or just conservatives, just anti-vax people or just people that support a vaccine. That's not how facts and information works, especially related to a virus. If it impacts you, then it impacts me and everyone else. But instead we politicized it. And what now is the case a year afterwards is that we now have two different realities about the virus. Well, no matter what stage of this virus that you're in, or what stage of this process you're in, two different realities have now opened up and now exist about this. And one of those realities says that America is trying to trick you in some way, shape, or form. Maybe the coronavirus is real, and maybe it's dangerous, but the number one thing to remember here, no matter what you hear, folks, is that America and the government is trying to trick you into mind control. From masks to mandatory vaccinations to they're coming for your guns, and now they're coming, door to door, and they're knocking on your door, and they're going to mandate, they're going to prick you in the arm whether you want to or not. Like, all these narratives are on the one side, right? We have all these narratives on one side. On the other side, you have people that are like, look, man, this is very serious. I'm going to wear 3 different masks after my vaccination at the store because I don't trust people. And we need to stay safe. We need to stay 6 feet apart. I'll wear my mask in my car because that's how serious I take this. Those are kind of the two schools of political thought on this. There's not too many people in the middle anymore, unfortunately, on this. Too many people in the middle who say, look, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to examine what's happening in front of me and make the best decisions for me. Not listen to the heat on either side. But unfortunately, that's not the case. We have the heat on either side, and DeSantis here selling koozies, don't Fauci my Florida, represents the first one that I mentioned, right? The people on the right. They don't want to have anything to do with this. This, coming from thehill.com, legislators in more than 40 states have introduced measures to bar vaccine passports, what we talked about yesterday. And many Republican governors have signed executive orders or laws barring their use. It's amazing how quickly Republican legislatures in these states can gather together to draft legislation against something whenever they're motivated to do so. This happened rather quickly. Now, vaccine passports obviously are not being used in the United States. As I mentioned yesterday, I don't think that they would even have a chance to survive any sort of legislative test here in the United States. I don't think anybody would support that, at least not right now, even though medical experts are saying, you know what, that might be a good idea to force more people to do this. We need to have more people vaccinated because otherwise Delta variant is going to grow. It's just going to kill more people. It's going to expand. It's going to kill more people. So you got a lot going on here. And unfortunately, we can't have a balanced conversation about this because of that politicization, I hate that word, of this particular issue. I mean, who's right here, right? What side do you come down on? The trick of that question is it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you think. There's just facts here. Just facts. And as the United States continues to try and curve towards the end of this thing, this is going to be a major factor. The fact that 40 states have introduced measures to ban vaccine passports. It plays along the narrative that The United States is coming for you, and the only protection that you have from the big bad U.S. federal government coming and knocking down your door and forcing an injection or forcing this vaccine on you is us as Republicans to protect your individual liberties and freedoms and rights in America and all this other stuff. It's cartoonish, but it's real. This is who the Republicans are at this point. They have become a dangerous version of themselves. I keep saying this, and I'll continue to say it again and again and again. And this is not about me being some flaming liberal, if you will. Anybody that listens to my shows knows I have no love for the Democrats in that blind sort of way either. But conservatism in the last 4 years has taken a dangerous turn. It's not just a new direction. It's not just a new thing. It's actually dangerous to our country. And there's no clearer example of that danger, of how that danger exposes itself, than when you couple conservative ideology along with the realities and the dangers of the coronavirus that we face today, even still today. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Jay comments in and says, this is related to the last story that we talked about with weed, and I was asking what's going to happen with the weed market once it becomes legalized on a federal level. Jay says, you can sell anything to become a millionaire. That is true. That is absolutely true. So we're about to see, like, who are the real hustlers out there, and who are just the people that just sell weed, I guess. Separate the weed from the chaff. All right, enough of the weed puns. I'm done, I promise. And he also says cases are going up for the third time in the UK. Whatever's going on in Europe related to the coronavirus is wild, man. It is really wild. I mean, it's obviously very bad here in the United States. By far and away, when you look at the numbers, the United States is doing tremendously worse than any country that you look at on this issue. So, not saying this from a high position or anything. But yeah, whatever's going on there in Europe seems to be, somewhat of a bellwether for what could be coming across the pond in our direction related to this. So I'm always on the lookout. Like, I don't think there's a reason to live in fear, and I also don't think that there's a reason to believe that the U.S. government has this malevolent, sort of secret, hidden agenda to get everyone vaccinated. I just don't see that. Like, there's a lot of people that, that just don't trust the science behind it. Talked about it yesterday. It's not about, having the right messenger say X, Y, or Z about vaccines. It's sometimes about how much trust you have in the original messenger, which is the U.S., which is the government. No matter what country you're in, your government is the entity that's trying to push you to get these vaccines. They might use different mouthpieces, but that's really what's behind it. Chris comments in on the Instagram, says, as long as Republicans are still mesmerized by the cult of Trumpism, we still have a dangerous situation in this country. Couldn't agree more. Before I move on, Ron DeSantis is like the favorite. If I looked at a poll a little bit earlier today in Politico that said, if in 2024, if Donald Trump does not run for president, it's crazy to say that sentence, but if Donald Trump doesn't run for president in 2024, then Ron DeSantis is like the odds-on favorite out of those left to be the guy that you run. I think he'd be a perfect candidate for the Republicans to run out there in a midterm election. Like, why not? You don't really roll out serious candidates in an opponent's midterm unless you're Donald Trump's opponent. But I don't know. Who knows? He's the most like Trump. He's been the most unabashedly and unembarrassingly like Trump. Like, he doesn't care about what he says, how he says it. Look, he still won an election to become governor, which is the argument that you can make for Trump too. He still won the election somehow. But anyway, Ron DeSantis and Florida is always a very interesting place. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll read your comments for you on the screen. Put them on the screen if you're on Facebook, on YouTube, or on Twitch. Another trending topic that I saw earlier today. Not this particular one, but I did want to read this headline first because it does have that shock value. I did want some shock value in the show. CEOs of S&P 500 companies this past year made on average 299 times more than their average workers last year. I had to go over some of the numbers to kind of put this story in context, because when I hear that a CEO makes 299 times rather more than their average worker, there's a lot about that phrase and a lot about that sentence that actually makes sense, in today's America, right? The Bernie Sanders thing that you hear, the Bernie Sanders narrative, top 1%, gets paid 10 times more than the bottom 10%. That kind of thing, right? Like, you hear this narrative that the pay gap, about the pay gap and how out of control that it is. And maybe you don't, but in case you don't, it is out of control. So this headline, it's almost like, okay, I get it. CEOs get paid a lot of money, but when you really start to lay it out and contextualize some of the numbers and some of the other issues that come with not, let's say, having a multi-million-dollar salary, things start to get a little hairy. Let's start at the top. A good place to start for most stories. According to CNBC, full-time minimum wage workers can't afford rent anywhere in the United States. We'll get to that in a second, but the first part of this says people working minimum wage jobs. Oh, I'm sorry, no. Let me go further down. The average S&P 500 company CEO making 299 times their average worker's salary means that executives received $15.5 million in total compensation on average per year last year. CEOs of the S&P 500, top 500 companies, right, received on average $15.5 million. Now, the average worker, the average non-supervisor, regional manager, regional to the supervisor of the manager, leadership positions, not included. You take your average everyday Joe worker, full-time worker. They earned on average $43,512 last year in 2020. $43,000. Now, I just said that their CEOs made $15.5 million on average. Now, CEOs are always the most highest paid person at the company. I get that, but geez, oh man, $15.5 million compared to $43,512 is just absurd. The report defines the report goes into this housing, sort of information, and it makes those numbers kind of seem interesting in context. What this report also found is that people working minimum wage jobs full-time cannot afford a two-bedroom, and most places in the country can't afford a one-bedroom apartment either. That it would take on average about $24 per hour. I had the numbers here. There we go. $24.90 per hour to afford a two-bedroom home. If you factor in responsible budgeting, they have a system for that. About $24.90 per hour for a two-bedroom home, and you'd have to be earning about $20.40 rather per hour for a one-bedroom rental. Now, how much is a person making $43,512 earning on average per hour? About $18.50, almost $19 an hour. As you may notice, that's just below the average of what it would take to afford a one-bedroom rental in America. Now, that's in America. There are cheap places in America. There are highly expensive areas in America, but a lot of those cheaper areas are starting to catch up now. This is just the average price across the country is $20.40 per hour, which is below the average income of the average worker at the top 500 company, one of the top 500 companies in the country. Now, I know that's a lot of numbers to throw out there, but all the averages come back around to pretty much the same general gist here. People do not earn that much money, and it's not just a comparison thing here. Oftentimes, stories like this are written so that the shock value of those numbers kind of draw you in. You want to read what's happening because you're like, what? How much more? That's absurd. That is absolutely crazy that CEOs are making that much money. And then you go off and complain about it with your coworkers and things like that. Hey, can you believe the bosses are making this much money? It really sucks. And you go back to work and you forget about it, right? The gap is a very important metric that we need to continue to watch, because I think it says something about the health of our economy, if that makes any sense. But that average number, 43,500, or about $18.50 or so an hour, full time, is not enough to pay for what has become the average rent price for a one-bedroom home. One person working one full-time schedule in America for one average rate cannot afford a one-bedroom home, folks. That's the only numbers you need to pay attention to. Ones across the board don't match up. So it's almost like for half the country, if that's just the average, the middle, half the country is working from a deficit like every day when they wake up. They're working from a deficit. Now, everyone just went through a pandemic in the last year, and that probably changed massively your job situation, too. Well, inflation's on the rise. Everything's more expensive, of course, after the pandemic, and we still have this issue that executives seemingly didn't really get all that affected. Their pay, at least, it wasn't all that much affected by the ails of the coronavirus, while the average worker is going to have to find a way to make the cookie stretch just a little bit longer. Of course, that's not fair, but coupled with the idea of what we talked about a couple shows ago, that there are people who are being offered higher wage jobs at this point, and they're turning them down. There's a reason for that. It's not that people have developed a sudden snobbery about how much they're getting paid, but people have realized that running on the hamster wheel and wearing themselves thin mentally and sometimes physically as well is sometimes not worth the ride. And that the idea of saying, you know what, let me figure something else out, either a higher paying job, a different situation, or I'm not accepting this low crap that I've been offered before. Whatever magical combination of things is happening in that way, it's shifting the way that the job market has to react. That's why you see Taco Bell. That's why you see, McDonald's, fast food restaurants, small, shops and pizza places and things like that offering incentives and higher pay for the work now. The workers have said, not at that price. You got to go a little bit higher, or else I'm going somewhere else. We're starting to say that more. And if enough workers sort of overthrow this system of and basically sort of freeze out the system, and more so than overthrow it, but freeze out the system and say, look, we're not going to bend to your demands as if we have no other choice, then the jobs are the ones that are going to have to adjust. They're going to have to pay more for you to be able to work there. Because this can't keep up. Full time, you're working 40 hours a week, and you can't even afford a one bedroom. You can't afford the closet to hang your work uniform up in. People aren't going to go on like that for forever. Eventually, there's going to be a breaking point, and maybe we've already reached that point. That would be great. That would be great. Don't listen to the narrative that, workers asking for more money or demanding more benefits is going to hurt us all as a country because there's going to be less money to shift around. $15.5 million for the average CEO, and their worker, the average worker that they go down and see further down in their building, is not even being paid enough to live in their apartment. Something to consider. A breaking point is coming, and it is much, much needed. Absolutely. Jay says, tax the rich would be the simplest. It'd be the simplest solution. I have no pushback for that. Tax the rich. Now, the issue with taxing the rich is that Democrats and Republicans are both rich. When it comes to taxing the rich, one of those groups is going to have to be responsible with pushing the tax the rich button. And both of those groups are very rich. And both of those groups stay rich by staying friends with other rich people. That is an extremely simplified version of understanding money in politics, but that's the gist of it. So in other words, there's no real motivation for either group, I think, to really have a stranglehold on the rich. It's like Bernie Sanders, AOC. You got a couple of other folks out there. Elizabeth Warren. Maybe they're on board with it, but the general gist of people, no. Probably not. Probably not. But we'll keep an eye on it. We got to keep fighting these things. We got to keep getting representatives that stand for these issues more so. As we get around to election time, these are the issues that oftentimes become, it's too late to discuss these kind of things. But as we think about what we want, that's how we can shape and craft what kind of representatives we want too. All right, that's all the time I got. Appreciate all the comments from folks. You can check me out on Instagram at Keaton D. Nichols. That's at Keaton D. Nichols. I'm also on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. I'm not on YouTube as Keaton D. Nichols, but you can catch me Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Keaton D. Nichols. If you want to follow the show, you can check out the show right now at A. Nichols Worth, anywhere that you can find your podcasts. Of course, if you want to find the home of the A. Nichols Worth podcast and other places where you can share and distribute that podcast as well, check out anchor.fm/A. Nichols Worth. There you can also become a member of the club, become a monthly donator, become a monthly contributor, or donate just once, whatever your specialty is. Just do it at anchor.fm/A. Nichols Worth, and I will be forever grateful. All right, I'll be back tomorrow night at 8 p.m. for a fresh edition of A Nichols Worth. New topics, new news, new everything. Everybody be safe, and I'll see you tomorrow.